Hello, this is Corey. Before we go to today's episode, I have some exciting news I want to share with you. Think about it on a scale from 1 to 10. How important is it for you to get this next year right? For many leaders, the answer is they can't afford to miss the mark in 2021. Because of the impact 2020 had on their business, their personal life, or their home life, they can't afford to miss that mark in 2021. So in light of all the tools that we already have at our fingertips, what else can we do to ensure success? We have found that one of the biggest blind spots of helping leaders and organizations reach their full potential is misaligned or mismanaged priorities. For example, when that CEO says it's all about the people and culture, but yet all they're ever talking about is profit. Or when that business leader talks about working at a healthy pace, but yet their expectation is you work 24/7. When you have misaligned priorities, your best leaders leave. This is why we're excited to announce the Prioritize Leader Academy. We recently launched this academy in Cincinnati, and due to the early success, we want to take this virtually to impact leaders outside of Cincinnati. This mastermind will bring together a few key components. The first one is content. This 12-month program will be centered around the Prioritize Leader framework. This is a proven framework that we've used for years with leaders and organizations. Second is community. We all know we don't want to be the smartest person in the room. And so this mastermind will surround you with other leaders that you can learn from. The third component is coaching. In between our mastermind sessions, there will be one-on-one coaching to help you implement the learnings into your personal and professional life. And the last component is this will be faith-centric. We will be bringing faith and scripture into our meetings, into our content and conversations to make sure that we are all Christ-centered leaders going forward. So if you are looking for accountability, outside perspective, and this sounds like it will help you reach your personal and professional goals, then the Prioritize Leader Academy is for you. We launch in April. We've got limited capacity. So visit CoreyMCarlson.com/Prioritize Leader Academy to learn more, as well as some upcoming free webinars that we will be having to do any Q&A to help answer any questions that you may have for this. So thank you for listening on to today's episode.
Welcome to the Win at Home First podcast. I'm your host, Corey Carlson. This podcast is where we talk about how successful business leaders win, not only at work, but also at home. On this podcast, we'll go behind the scenes with great leaders to hear stories of how they win. Thank you for listening, and on to today's episode.
Hello, this is Corey. I'm excited to share this next episode with you with Tim Metzner. Tim is a very good starter. He's created a couple different companies, but he's also very good at instilling a good culture and retaining employees and helping with growth. So we'll talk about what it was like leaving one company to the next and that understanding a two-part calling, and great discussion along those lines. Understanding that in order to hear God's voice, we got to spend more time with him, and that idea of having our antenna higher to hear him. It's an awesome episode. I look forward to you listening to it. On to today's episode. Thank you. Hello, it's Corey Carlson. You're listening to the Win at Home First podcast. Today is Tim Metzner, and he is a friend of mine here in Cincinnati, but he is also just a wealth of knowledge with a huge entrepreneurial spirit. He has launched a handful of companies that I'm aware of, and I'm sure even more that he has his fingers in. But about 8 years ago, launched a company, Differential, which was a risk at the time, but then grew it to be successful. Ocean, which is an accelerator that I've been involved in, where it's a faith-based accelerator to help launch companies. Tim's one of the co-founders. And then just 2 years ago, launched another company that is off to a very fast pace called Coterie. And all while doing that, he has a successful marriage, very engaged with his kids. Always fun to see your pictures, Tim, that you have on Instagram of you and the kids being adventurous. So really winning at work and home. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
And it's a pleasure, Corey. I certainly love talking about entrepreneurship, but it's a lot less often I get to talk about winning at home and family and kids and marriage. And, that is, as we both know, none of the other stuff matters if you get that wrong. So happy to be here, man.
Yeah, well, thank you. What have you seen as your career has evolved? What is that key trait that a leader needs to have in order to win at home and at work?
I think it's a hard one, and probably I would have answered differently at different times. Right now, I would say it's just focus and intentionality, right? So, I am wired to go hard. I love my work, and, it's left to my own devices. Like, I would work all the time, right? Like, I really enjoy the work I'm doing, and I feel called to it, right? And when we are in spots like that, it's really easy to overswing, but having the insight to, or just the discipline to be focused, when I'm, especially hard now, right? Like, where I'm working at home, and, obviously home is home. So, but being able to like shut it off and say, like, this is now family time. That means like, put the phone away, get it away from me. Don't be checking emails. Like, when I'm working, go hard. When I'm with my family, go hard. Right. And the ability to focus on those both separately, I think, has been really important for me. And it seems obvious, and I'm sure it's very common advice on the podcast, but it's one of those things that's really easy to wrap your head around, really hard to actually do. Like, cause there's always like that email or that thing, or but what if so-and-so gets back to me, or, you hear the phone buzzing in the corner and you just want to go look at it. But just getting disciplined about really focusing on, like, all right, my family should know when I'm with them that I'm with them, and I'm not going to be kind of half with them and half scrolling.
Mm-hmm. So getting tactical, how do you do it? Because it is hard, especially when you are the co-owner and running the company. You're always thinking, I've got employees, I got to make sure they're happy. Oh, wait, I can't have a dissatisfied customer over here. How are you putting boundaries? I mean, you put the phone away and you, like, for 2-3 hours a night, you're not touching it. What are the things that you're doing, Tim, that allow you to, be intentional?
Yeah. I mean, a couple just quick hitters, like, first, removing, like, turning notifications off. I did that a long time ago. And, even things like not having social media apps on my phone. And, I think I only have Instagram and Twitter, and neither of those have notifications. So the temptation is not even there for those things, because I don't, have them. I don't get the ping. But certainly from a work standpoint, first of all, it's the same. Like, I don't have notifications for email or for Slack or any of those things. Like, my phone doesn't ping every time I get one of those, which is helpful. But then tactically, it's, I put it, on the counter when I go downstairs, when I walk in the door, and, turn it upside down and put it there and leave it there. And, like, for me, it's like, we have 4 kids. My oldest is 8. My youngest is 3. So it's always frenetic pace, right? Like, there's even just eating a meal is chaos. Right. And so, like, being like fully immersing myself in that chaos and saying, like, all right, there's a point in time between when I walk in the door or walk downstairs and bedtime, where it's like, it's just going to be go, 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 whether that's playing, getting through a meal, running to practices, all that stuff. But it's easy for me to, like, kind of compartmentalize and say, until the kids are in bed, like, unless there's a mission critical, like, thing that I know is pending, there's just no reason. Like, it'll be there. I can check. I allow myself to check after kids get in bed. And so it's pretty easy to say, like, all right, for several hours, shut it down. And then on the weekends, kind of similarly, like, I give myself Saturday morning. I'm like, if I want to work on the weekend, I need to wake up early Saturday and work. And I'll allow myself to do that until kids are up, or maybe a little bit longer, depending on what we have going on. But beyond that, unless there's a really big thing I have to get out the door, I'm going to shut it down the rest of the weekend. And I'm going to actually do like a Sabbath on Sunday and not work at all, and having some of those rhythms. And then, so that's part of it. The other part of it is, like, having a discussion with my wife, so she knows what the intended rhythms are. And so she can call me on it if I'm not doing it. Right. So it's like, hey, why do you have your phone on you? Or thought you were not going to work this weekend, stuff like that. So I think having that openness to call each other on that stuff, as well as just some really basic, like, here's how I'm going to handle it.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love the idea of intentional communication with your wife, just for on the Saturday morning working. If you feel it's going to be working till 11 a.m. kind of thing, just because you've got a big deliverable, if you tell her that on Friday, then she's not going to be up, pacing, wondering where you're at Saturday morning. You should be up here by now, what's going on. But by telling her in advance and you guys talking about it, then she's prepared. So I think that's fantastic. You do that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, in general, we try and do that. Maybe this is getting into some of your other questions, but, like, I think the communication piece is probably one of the most important parts of it, where, again, like, Christy knows that I want to be a good husband and father. And that's a huge, important thing to me. And to do that, like, I'm going to need people who point out when I'm not doing that, right? Or where I might be starting to swing too far to the other extreme. And Christy is the most obvious candidate for seeing that first. And so she has permission, and not that I will never get defensive. We all naturally get defensive sometimes, but like, I know that her heart's in the right place. And what's cool about our relationship and our openness is like, she has told me on both extremes. Like, she has called me out on, it seems like you're overextending yourself and you're not spending as much time. And when you're with us, your mind's not with us. And I can see these things. And like, she'll call me on that, right? Like, you're working too much. She has also in the past at different times called me on like, it doesn't seem like you're going very hard right now. Like, aren't you supposed to be going hard? And like, as the wife of an entrepreneur, like, I get it. Like, she wants to know that I'm putting, giving my all into these things that are supposed to be like, we're banking our future on, right? So the fact that she will call me on both extremes is actually really good, because it's not just like, oh, the wife is nagging me because I'm working too much. Like, she wants me to help find the balance too of like, I know you want to go hard and God is calling you to go hard. Also, like, don't miss being a father and a husband. So I think having both of those kind of conversations over the years has told me that when I hear from her, I can really trust that it's coming from a place of like, I want the best for you and for our family.
On the intentionality with the family, I love hearing you talk about that, Tim. As I'm working with clients, as I'm talking to owners, some of the part that trickles into there is, okay, I love that idea of intentionality. I get it. But it's overcoming fear of failure. It's overcoming fear of letting a customer or an employee down, or the thought that you actually control everything. How have you, or I know it's not every day do you have it figured out, but how do you help with the mindset to understand the fear and the control piece in your own life?
Yeah, it's a good question, Corey. I think it's the answer no one loves to hear is like, it takes reps. Like, you just got to, put in the time and commit to like trusting, like, all right, I'm going to create a new rock on my calendar. That's a Wednesday night. I'm not going to work after kids go to bed. Like, this is going to be Christy and I's time or whatever. Like, you have to commit to that. And then, look back on it and reflect and say, like, is this bearing fruit? Like, is this working? Like, have I actually missed out on work opportunities because I decided one night a week, I don't get my laptop out after kids go in bed? Like, it's having those like reflections or retrospectives and looking back and saying, like, is this working? How's this going? I think the other side of it for me, Corey, is like, I've had way too many examples of God showing up in ways that I know were not on my power. In fact, I have a tattoo on my arm that says, not on my power, not to my glory. And it just reminds me all the time of like, so many of the things that have like, so much of the fruit that I see in my life, there's no way I can point back at it and say, like, I did that and that and that and that led to, these great things happen. The only answer in so many of these cases is like, God showed up and has been incredible for me. So having so many examples of him showing up through my life, through my career, through my family, it's that constant reminder of like, oh yeah, he's present, he's good, he's got this. And nothing I do is, I had this shift in mindset. I don't know exactly when it happened, but like, grew up in a family that was taught hard work and discipline. And like, you gotta, if it is to be, it's up to me. Like, I sort of had that mentality of like, if I'm going to have a successful life, career, whatever, like, it's on me. Like, I've got to pull myself up by my bootstraps and like, get out there and work my face off. And I still believe that. I still believe like God calls us to go hard, right? Whatever we do, we want to work as if working for the Lord. So firmly believe that. But I had that shift at some point of like, not in my power, not to my glory. Like, yes, I'm going to work hard, but it doesn't matter what I do. I'm going to need God to show up, and I'm going to have to give him glory, because it's not about what I'm doing. And I think that shift in mentality, both at work and home, has been really helpful, because on the work side, that allows me to go like, I'm going to take a day off on the weekend, or I'm not going to work tonight, and expect God to show up.
Oh, I love that. I did not do a tattoo, but this spring I actually had a sign made, a custom sign for my office that says "Your mina, not mine," based off the parable of 10 minas. And as you mentioned, that not my power, not my glory, I've had some scarcity mindset around money and striving, really, I'd say my whole life. But there's been moments where I've overcame it and it's been good. But when COVID hit, quarantine, all those components, someone pointed me to that parable. And so for myself, I'm like I said, I didn't get the tattoo, but I got a sign on my wall that says you're mine and not mine, because it's that reminder to all of us that God is in control. And, I love Psalm 127, where it talks about those who labor do it in vain, where, basically God's got the night shift. So I think it's so neat to hear you talk about it, because you have been a starter for many companies, but yet, even though you do the hard work each day, you're releasing control, as if God's got it. If this thing's going to launch, then here we go.
And I do think, I think I said this already, but a key to actually getting to the point where you can trust him to show up is reflecting on where he has shown up, right? Like, if you're not actually taking time to look in the rearview mirror and say, like, oh man, I can see all these examples of, even sometimes small examples of, like, what the work that he's doing in my life. Once you get to that point, it does get a lot easier to trust that you can, put your phone down at the end of the day and really trust that God's going to show up, even if it's not in the exact way or you expect or need or want him to right now. Like, over the course of a month, a year, a career, like, there are going to be way more examples of goodness than not.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the word reflect and just thinking about overall quiet time. What are your daily rhythms, Tim? Like, what are you doing to get in that mindset of being a good father, husband, as well as co-owner?
Yeah, I think morning quiet time for me has been key. Just especially, I don't know, maybe the last decade, but probably a little more than that, where I've gotten good at. I've always been a morning guy. Like, I can get up and get moving pretty well, but it used to be get up and get, start making the donuts, right? Like, it's like right to work, like, let's go kind of thing. And now, I'm pretty good at, and it's not every day certainly, but, more days than not, like, I start the day, in a chair or on a walk, spending time with God. So for me, it's prayer. Certainly it's reading the word, it's reflection, it's some might call it meditation, but just being quiet and listening and, like, slowing my mind down. And honestly, I used to be fairly, like, legalistic isn't the right word, but, like, regimented about, like, I need to do these 4 or 5 things in my, 60 to 90 minutes. Like, I want to check all these boxes, and I'd have a list of, like, fitness, reading, journal, like, all these things. Like, I must do all these. I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm like, this is my time. Like, do what I want with it. Like, let's see where God takes me this morning. Like, maybe I end up just reading the whole time one day, and maybe I end up on a long walk or a good workout, because I just feel like that's what my mind or body wants and needs. And so I've gotten a lot better at, like, still keeping that time, but not being as, like, regimented about, like, in order for your day to be great, you have to do these 5 things. Like, I still over time like to do a lot of those things, and I find value in, like, journaling and, some of these things, but I'm not like, oh, I didn't check that box today, it's not going to be a great day. It's more about, like, carve that time and space for God to show up in various ways. And just for me to reflect and slow down and, like, have some peace and quiet in an otherwise sort of chaotic, Zoom filled, loud kid sort of day.
Mm-hmm. And not feeling like a loser if you didn't do the journaling or you didn't do these, but giving yourself grace. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Before we go back to the rest of this episode, I want to share with you my book, Win at Home First. Some of you have read it, so thank you very much. For others of you, you have not. And I encourage, if you're looking for a resource to help you with these times of your work is now in your home and your home is now in your work, and what this looks like, this book is being helpful to many leaders like you. Forbes magazine said it was one of 7 books everyone on your team should read. And the book is broken up into 4 different sections to help you. First is about you, understand who you are. The second is marriage and ideas and tips to help with your marriage. Third is parenting. And then last is work. So these 4 different sections to help you recalibrate during this time and to help move forward. So if you are needing additional resources, I encourage you to check out my book, Win at Home First. It is available on Amazon as well as Audible. And so on to the rest of the episode. Thank you very much. I have a lot of clients that will come to me, and part of our working together is they're stuck. And that doesn't mean in a bad way. It's just they have this idea and they don't know what they want to do with it. Do they pursue it? Is it just a wild idea and they need to stay in say the corporate setting that they are in, or maybe it's to launch a new product within the corporate setting? So it's just a variety of things, but they're stuck. So how have you gone from having an idea and decide, all right, we're going for it? And what does that look like on your journey?
So, I mean, first for me, I always say, like, I'm actually not an ideas guy. Like, everyone thinks you're a serial entrepreneur. You do all these crazy things. Like, you probably wake up in the middle of the night with ideas for new businesses all the time. Like, I actually don't. I'm not the person. And in fact, my journey to differential was one of frustration, where it was like, I was in a startup. I was early employee at a company called Spark People, and I spent, I don't know, about a decade there, all in, including college. It was like I started co-oping there. But by the end of the time there, last couple of years, I was sort of convinced that it was time for me to step out.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept waiting for lightning to strike. Like, I was saying prayers like, God, put me in, coach. Like, I'm here. Tell me what you want me to do. Like, I'm ready. Like, let me go. And I had some ideas over the time, but nothing that was like clearly the like, go run hard. This is going to be a game changer, world changing idea. Instead, what I finally heard really clearly and what I stepped into, now on two separate occasions, it was like being called away from. And like, I have, come to believe, like, oftentimes calling is a like two-step process. Like, first you have to be called away from whatever you're doing today before you can be called to it. And sometimes honoring God is actually realizing you're not being called away from a thing yet. Right. And sometimes that's true. Like, he wants us in the spot doing the work we're doing right now. And maybe that's so you can side hustle and work on a concept or idea on the side. Maybe he's still just preparing you for whatever is next. But for me, in both cases, I actually felt pretty clearly called away from without knowing what I was called to. So I quit my job at Spark People, had some thoughts and ideas about like consulting work I could do and maybe businesses I might start, but there was not a clear like, hey, this is the thing I'm going to go do. And so that was definitely a leap of faith, both for me and for Christy. And we had the discussion, I remember very clearly, of like, I support you. This is Christy, I support you. I love you. I trust you. Can we just agree though? Like, if in 6 months you don't know, like, there's no clarity about what's going on here, like, you'll go get a big boy job.
Yeah. I remember you telling me that. Like, but what I love about that is that you guys had a deadline.
Yep.
You guys had a set deadline of what it was, which you both had a piece about. And
totally.
You would know if you had not made it, then you would have said, hey, I gave it my go, and you would have more likely had a piece going back into whatever the next thing was. Right? But and
the cool thing about that, Corey, is like, it never came up again. Christy never once brought that up in the entire time. And it wasn't because things were perfectly clear and going amazing. But it was clear enough that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, I think, to her, that what I felt from her throughout that entire journey was just support. Like, even when I didn't necessarily believe in myself or believe that I was doing the right things, like, she never wavered in her support of me and never said again, like, remember that 6-month conversation? We're coming up on the deadline here. Like, it never came back. And, would it have if it was clear that things weren't going the right direction? Probably. But I feel like she never felt like she had to have that chat with me again. But it was clarifying for both of us and sort of just having that mark and saying, like, okay, when you're stepping into unknown, let's at least put some rails around, like, what does unknown look like? What's the downside risk here? It's like, well, we'll not make very much money for 6 months, and then you go get a job and we'll be fine. And Christy was working at that time also, so we could be on her benefits. And, there was a lot of sort of protections in place. So that worked out well, but it was, again, it was same at Coterie. So I was, so fast forward, things had gone well at Differential, and, we'd gone through this winding journey, but we had a great company, great culture. We're growing revenues and profits and clients and team. And I just felt pretty clearly and sort of knew this was coming, like, scaling a service company while we were building a great business. It just never felt like the thing I was supposed to be doing. It felt like the right thing for Differential, but not really it wasn't going to be a long-term thing for me. My partners kind of knew that, but I had this, kind of point in time where it was like, all right, God's calling me away, calling me to do something, like take a big swing. And I had a conversation with the team at Differential just to pump the brakes a bit and say, like, is this within the walls of Differential? Like, do we want to try and build something and like use our profits and resources internally? And try and build a company or a product within differential? And pretty clearly, the answer was no, for my other partners. It was like, hey, we got a good thing going. We certainly haven't made it, but things are going in the right direction, and we don't think it makes sense to rock the boat. And I agreed with that, honestly. It was like, if I was an outside advisor to this business, that's exactly what I would say. Like, stay the course. Like, you're just starting to figure things out. Like, focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the right conversation. And it was also pretty clear, like, okay, I think it's time for me to step away then. But again, it's kind of hard if you think about it. It's like, you basically, I fired myself from my own company and said, like, I had this risky conversation, put it out there. And like, when it became clear we weren't going to do that, I'm like, so I think I got to go. Right. And I didn't know what that meant. Like, I didn't have I wasn't like sitting on an idea, like, I can't wait to go build this company. It was like, all right, I think I need time and space to go explore what's going to be next. And I feel like God's calling me to take a bigger swing. That was sort of the thing I was feeling, was like, I kept thinking about impact. And it's like, if you're going to step away from a company you started and it's going really well, the bar is pretty high on what you do next.
Yeah, no pressure.
So no pressure. But I felt like, this idea of like multi-generational impact was like on my heart. Like, I want to do something that, if goes well, could go really well for our community, for my family, for like creating great jobs. One of the things I loved about Differential was like, we created an amazing culture and people loved coming to work. And I just fell in love with the idea of creating great jobs for people, like where they can come alive, not just in their careers, but when you come alive at work, like, it has a trickle over effect into other areas of your life. And I'm like, man, how cool would it be if we could start a company that created, thousands of jobs that did that, not just 30. And so having a chance to do something that, if it goes well, could go really well. Like, that was sort of what I was called to, but that was scary because I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't exactly, I had some ideas about like categories, and insurance was one of those. And, as God would have it, he introduced me to someone who was building an insurance company. But, that was after I'd already committed to leaving Differential without knowing what was next.
It's pretty neat that in your story of calling, it's a two-step process, the calling away, the calling to. Going back to this calling away, just to understand more of your perspective on it, because to be honest, I'm not very good at it, in the standpoint of, I was president of sales for a company. I wanted to go do coaching. I wanted to build the business that I've, been building right now. But quite honestly, I didn't have the guts to do it because I didn't want to leave the salary. I didn't want to leave the title. It took me getting fired to be the kick in the butt to get going. And then you talk about having that deadline. I had a severance package, and my wife and I agreed, give coaching a go. At the end of the severance package, go find that corporate job.
Right.
Like you said, a big boy job.
Yep.
And so I hustled because I had a deadline. I believe this is what I wanted to do. But for me, the calling away didn't really happen. It took more of, I had to get fired to have that happen. What about for you on your calling aways? What does that look like for that listener who is like, am I being called away, or is it the pizza I ate last night?
Mm-hmm.
How have you been able to help either yourself, but also just others think through, all right, I think you're getting called away?
That's a great question. For me personally, it was always over a period of time. It was never like overnight. I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, time to go do the next thing. It was like a sort of consistent pattern of like feeling like I was hearing from God in different ways that, maybe not super overtly or explicitly pointed me, but like, as I look back on patterns, I'm like, yeah, I feel like consistently what I'm being pushed towards is like, here's this next theme. So when I left to start Differential, the theme was like, if you don't start a company now, you never will. Because Christy and I had our first kid, and the thought of having more kids was like, well, you're going to get locked up in a salary, and like, it's going to be really hard to leave, right? Because the startup I was at, exactly, like the startup I was at, like I was just starting to actually get paid a normal-ish salary, and could see a path to where like that could become fairly secure and stable, and like, I think that scared me a little bit. It's like, well, if I get too comfortable, like, and I feel like I'm supposed to start a business. And so, the consistent theme was like, yeah, you're a builder. I want you to build. I'm not going to tell you what to build until you step out of this thing, but like, take that next step. So, but again, that happened over a couple of years where it was like, am I, and I'm processing on my own. I'm processing with like people around me, kind of sharing thoughts and feelings. And so I think it's like being patient with it. Like, because it is easy to, in a moment, like wake up one day and be like, "Ooh, I think I'm supposed to go do a thing," or you have an idea, or a light bulb comes on. But it's a lot harder to be patient in that and go like, okay, let me make sure that I'm actually hearing what I think I'm hearing. And are there ways to explore, like start to go down different rabbit trails without maybe fully ripping off the Band-Aid. Right. So that's where it was for me. It was like, I want to pull on that thread and see if what I think I'm hearing is correct. And, over conversations and in prayer and, kind of consistent month over month, day over day time, like it becomes pretty obvious. It did to me anyways. But I had to keep exploring that. And, I talked about reflecting, like part of it is literally like looking back at over old journals and like I would earmark certain ones where I'm like, I think God's telling me something on this day, like fold that page over. I want to come back to that one, and doing that like multiple times over several months and sometimes years of like, all right, is that playing out the way it seemed like it was going to play out? Did I actually hear that correctly? And so for me, that's been part of the process always.
It's awesome. Going from differential to coterie, what was that timeline, you think? You said it's a process. Are we talking a couple months, couple years that you just felt, all right, God's at work, something's moving. I don't know exactly what it is. How long was that process for you?
It was definitely at least a year of like, I feel like I'm getting prepared to step out again or to do something else. It was at least a year of that. And again, I remember like a couple journals that I would go back to regularly of like, oh, I feel like in a moment God was speaking to me. Timing, that's frustrating though, because when you feel like you hear something, like you just want to go. I do. Like
that's why I keep asking these questions. Sometimes the beautiful thing about this podcast at times is selfishly, I just ask questions to help myself, even though I know it helps the listeners. But for you, it's like I want to know because I'll get these ideas and I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's do this. We'll launch this tomorrow. Here we go.
Yep, totally. And actually, I think sometimes that happens, right? Like God speaks to us in different ways and at different times. But for me, I feel like maybe part of what has happened is like, I talk about my antenna. Like, I think my antenna is a little bit higher than it used to be, meaning like I hear God, I hear signals maybe earlier than I would have in my life. So I've sort of come to this realization of like, if I hear a nugget of a thing, it might be that God's not ready for me to make a move, but he is speaking to me about it. And he is starting to, sort of trickle ideas my way. And I'm like, well, the higher my antenna is, the better my relationship is with God, the more likely I am to hear it earlier and to have a little bit of like some preparation and time. And so, but there is someone else pointed that out to me, and it was so helpful because I was frustrated about like, oh, I feel like God's calling me in a direction. He's calling me away, but like, he hasn't told me what to do yet. And someone was like, well, maybe you just hear him earlier than you used to. And like, he's just starting to prepare you. Like, he's not ready for you to go. He's just giving you a little bit of a heads up. I'm like, oh man, for me, that was really fresh and helpful to be like, I need to be patient in this. And it was still hard, but like, it's one of those things where you sort of know when you know. And,
that's so good. Why is your antenna higher now than it used to be?
Because of my morning routine and just my consistent like discipline of reading the word, being in small groups, praying with my wife, like, just these things that like my rhythms are better than they used to be. And therefore I feel like I have more opportunities. It's like you have more at bats, right? I give myself more chances to hear from God by some of these different disciplines and rhythms. And so, yeah, I feel like if you do that, like turns out God's actually speaking all the time. Right. But, whether or not we hear him is sort of up to us. So, yeah.
I love the idea that, we'll talk about this. I have been involved in a men's ministry in Montana, and we'll talk about, we know our spouse's voice. We know our kids' voice because we spend time with them. So in order to know God's voice, then we're going to need to spend time with God's voice. We don't understand, or we can't pick out the words of voices we don't understand or listen to or in close community with. So that's good. That's neat to hear that.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Because one of the things that's helped me as well is understanding my why, like my personal why. Like, why, what did God put me on this earth to do? And I know people spend entire lifetimes kind of struggling with that question, right? And I feel really fortunate to have sort of, and maybe it'll change, but for at least the last decade or so, it's been clear to me, like God wants to use me to grow the kingdom through entrepreneurship, period. And so like, once I realize that, like, that's a lens that I get to say like, okay, that thing I'm hearing or feeling or thinking, like, does that align with what you believe God has told you you're here to do? If it doesn't, it's pretty easy for me to go like, write it down, sure, but that's probably not something you're supposed to spend time on. As important as it might be, and as you might want to just run after it. Like, remember, God has told you pretty clearly over the course of your life, like, this is what He's put you here to do, and like having that, it's kind of similar to like knowing what His voice sounds like. For me, that's part of understanding His voice.
Yeah, oh, that's good. Also, you mentioned social media. One thing I like about, you and I are, friends or whatever on social media, is you and Christy are very good about date nights, like Holly and I. So well done and way to go. There's times I'll talk to leaders where I actually just talked to a client yesterday. It's like, when was the last time you were on a date? It's I think beginning of summer, kind of, many months. So right. I just think it's neat that you two have made that a priority, even with young kids. That you spend the money on the babysitter and you go out and about. So,
yep. And listen, I'm a huge fan of that. Also, I give my wife all the credit for that, because as much as I love it, like, I'm not great at planning and making it happen, but she is. And I'm so grateful for that, because it is such a healthy part. Like, I love that question always of like, are you dating your wife? Are you dating your spouse? Because most people, like, if they're honest, they're not. Like, well, there's some magic in that dating phase. Like, don't miss it.
Right. Absolutely. Tim, what are you most excited about in the next month?
Well, on Saturday, Chrissy and I are sending the kids to my parents, and we got a hotel room downtown, and we're celebrating our 13th anniversary. So we're doing an overnight date night, dinner out and hotel, and just staying here in Cincinnati. But we're, getting out of the house and getting the kids away. And we both just super look forward to that time. That's the most pressing one I'm excited about this weekend.
That's awesome. Holly and I celebrate 21 years this summer. We stayed at the Lytle Hotel downtown Cincinnati. That's where we're going. Oh, great. It is awesome. Good. There were moments where we may edit this part out because it's pure advertisement. Yeah. They're not sponsoring this podcast, but there were moments where we felt we were not in Cincinnati. The view here, kind of, you look over here or, there, we said a couple different times, this feels like we're in Europe. So we had a blast. So good. Enjoy it. Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
How can leaders get a hold of you if they want to learn more? Obviously you're big on entrepreneurship. You're big on your faith. You're a very strong culture guy. So how can people get a hold of you?
Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter, which is at Tim Metzner. On Twitter is an easy one. Email is always fine. tim.metzner@gmail.com is easiest way to reach me there. So those are, hit me up on any of those ways. And especially if you mention you want to talk about building a great culture or entrepreneurship plus faith plus family or any combination of those things, like, I talked about that lens I use. Like, I don't say no to a meeting if someone wants to talk about those things. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tim, for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Corey. It's a pleasure.
I want to thank you for listening to my podcast, Win at Home First. I am so grateful to hear from listeners like you that this content has been helpful. So now I would love for you to pay it forward. I want to get this message in the hands of more listeners. We need leaders to be winning both at home and at work, especially during this time. So please take a minute to share this episode with somebody you think would find value in it, as well as rate and subscribe. As a thank you, please visit my website at coreymcarlson.com to download a free resource that people are finding value in. Thank you very much.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.